My name is Manal Elkarra. I'm a San Francisco native, currently a family physician in San Francisco with family from the Gaza Strip.
And what are the conditions for healthcare workers in the Gaza? I mean, it seems like there's massive bombing, there's no electricity. How do people take care of people who are being injured and defend themselves, actually?
It is, as you can imagine, very difficult because before this Israeli airstrike even occurred by land, air, and sea, the population of the Gaza Strip was already under a siege since really 2007 with very limited medical supplies, very limited equipment. Even before 2007, I can give an example. When I was in undergraduate school many years ago, I did an internship with the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, which is affiliated with the Red Cross. And even at that time, which was 1999, you'd go into the basement of the hospital and they had some medical equipment, but they didn't have all the necessary pieces. And so they had all these European nations that donated, CT scans or X-ray machines. But even then, when there was no known blockade as we know it now, there was still limitation of movement, limitation of resources, and a lot of the needed equipment even back then was not there. So you can imagine, this is not just a limited supply from 2007 when the blockade began, but it's really been for many, many years.
So, so you're saying that the Israeli government refused to allow medical equipment for the Palestinian people in the Gaza?
So I cannot say if they purposefully did not allow it, but they always found a security reason to block some kind of equipment, whether it was a certain material that was in the equipment, anything. But you can imagine that was also said for everything. I mean, even food supplies. So it really is interesting, what they choose to label as a security threat.
By
because
calories? They were
yes.
stopping calories? What was that all about?
So they calculated how much food could be, safely shipped over to meet the minimal caloric needs of the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, so that they would not become malnutrition by definition.
What do you think about that?
That's very horrific. I mean, it's a very sad thing. I think people have to be aware of the strategies that the Israeli occupying force is using to dehumanize the population, to humiliate the population in Gaza, and to weaken them, even physically. So.
And what does it mean for healthcare workers when they bomb the electrical plant and there's no power? How do you take care of people?
So I think it shows their will and their resilience, in that they are still able to provide whatever medical care that they can, even with these limited supplies. So if before they had limited imaging machines, imaging accessibility, they had limited medications, they had limited maybe infrastructure, but now you can imagine during this recent onslaught, it was limited physicians. They weren't able to actually access the hospitals. While they're providing care in the hospitals, there was a hospital that was actually shelled with many medical workers, nurses, and even patients who were seeking care in the hospital. They were killed as well. So it's a feeling of not being safe, and the same was for the ambulance workers. The same were for the first responders, the firefighters. I mean, it really affected everyone who was trying to provide any kind of care. But in that, they were still able to try their best, though, to provide the services that they need with the limited supplies that they have. And they've always done that. Throughout. It's not just in 2014, 2012, 2008, 2000. Every Israeli military onslaught. Unfortunately, it's been the same situation.
Isn't that a war crime, bombing a hospital?
Yes, it is. It is. And, I think what's unfortunate is when we watch a lot of the corporate media here in the United States, every Israeli action will seem justified for people. But there was, a shelling that came out of the school or next to the school. But even under humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention, if you know that there are people who are seeking shelter in an area, even if there is, fire coming from nearby, you're not allowed to hit that population. And we have to, that's just one example. But like I mentioned earlier, is the Israeli army is one of the strongest armies in the world. They have, the location of every single house, every single school, every single hospital.
They were phoning people to warn them to get out. I mean, you have to have a lot of information to phone people.
It's a very small place. So from a secure, from intelligent aspect, they know everything. They know every house and whose family it belongs to, how many people live in it and their names and their affiliations. Everything is known. So you can imagine, with that knowledge, the Israeli army was still targeting houses and places of worship and hospitals and rehabilitation centers, and really I think when you look at the purposeful attack on the hospitals, it is very sad, and to try to use an excuse as that was a security threat, and that's why we needed to bomb the hospital. There's no excuse for that. There were physicians, nurses, paramedics who lost their lives trying to do their job and to protect and heal others. And so it's very unfortunate.
And what can healthcare workers in the United States do about this? I mean, the U.S. government is arming Israel billions of dollars. Wow. We're giving them the jets, the F-16s, these bombs, laser-guided bombs. I mean, it seems like the United States is actually helping in this massacre in Gaza.
Unfortunately, we are. And I think that's the one thing, the one message that many people in Palestine want to let the world know, especially in the United States, because our tax money directly, goes to supply aid to Israeli military. And even during this attack, unfortunately, our government approved the transfer of ammunition during this war to be sent. Actually, it was already, in an area. There is an area, I believe, next to Israel, where there are stored ammunition, and they were allowed to tap into that. And these weren't for the Smart Dome, the Iron Dome. Those were other supplies, another emergency $250 million that were approved for that. These were actually ammunitions that were used against innocent people. And so, it does put us in a place. What can we do, just as citizens of this country, is raise awareness and recognize that we want our tax money to fund our education system, our health system, which are both, failing, to provide care that is needed for our own people here. And if we do decide to send aid to other nations, that it should not be in military aid, because this, military industrial complex, it's a for-profit. It's all for profit, and it's for financial gain. Every war, my family, when we talk to them to see how they're doing, they'll say the same thing. Oh, this is a new kind of weapon. They didn't have this last time. They feel like they're experimental rats for the weapons industry, because nobody knows what these weapons are. A lot of the physicians who are working there, and some of them come from other countries, have extensive background in terms of working in different war zones, and they will always say the same thing every war, is that I've never seen this kind of injuries before. I wonder what caused this kind of injury. And especially this time, unfortunately, a lot of the weapons, some of it is known, and it's known to be illegal under international law to be used. And unfortunately, we hear about the almost 2,000 individuals who've been killed, but over the 10,000 who've been injured. Many of those injuries, unfortunately, are very catastrophic. They're not just, plain wounds. A lot of them are amputation. And, it's almost as if these weapons are, manufactured to cause as much destruction in a smaller area. And therefore, you don't see these, when you watch it, unfortunately, we would watch the live coverage on the Arabic satellite television stations. Long ago, when you have an image of war, you see the bomb drop and you see this big smoke, and shrapnel flying very high in the air. But this time around, we would see when the missiles would strike or the certain bombs would strike, the damage was much more limited in a smaller area, but with a greater force. And so instead of damaging all the buildings, everyone who happened to be in that area was just, killed instantaneously. And these, again, I believe they're called dime. I'll look up the name of what that, I forgot the name, but it's like this inert material that is very dense, and it causes a lot of injury. And so these are not meant to be used in a civilian population.
Well, I mean, it has a long history. The Israeli invasion of Lebanon, they used cluster bombs supplied by the United States. Pete McCloskey, who raised that in Congress, was then hounded out of Congress by the supporters of Israel. Yeah, so even though these are war crimes, using cluster bombs supplied by the United States on the civilian population, it seems like the attack on Gaza, the small city, by the most advanced weaponry in the world, and even new weaponry, is ongoing in the United States government and the politicians here. Are you surprised that Barbara Lee and other politicians here in the Bay Area have been completely silent? They talk about massacre in Iraq and other places, but it seems like they're massacres and massacres.
I can answer even as a physician when it comes to, let's say, healthcare reform. You will always find, elected officials either arguing or having opposing opinions. Same thing with immigration reform. Same thing, any kind of domestic issue and usually a foreign issue. You'll always have our elected politicians. There's a debate, there's people who have difference of opinion, but it's really amazing how when it comes to supporting, military aid to the state of Israel, it's all one voice. Everyone lines up in support. And I think that's very concerning when you don't have anyone who's questioning what is happening in terms of our elected officials. And I think that, we have a responsibility there. We have a responsibility on a local level, to ensure that, whether it's Board of Supervisors, our local mayors, even on that level, to ensure, okay, where do you stand on sending military aid to nations, not just Israel, other countries as well, who use these weapons against innocent civilians, where there's no interest. There's no interest for our national security in these actions. There's a lot of detrimental health effects.
But there's money to be made?
But there's money to be made, yes.
Very profitable. Though.
And I think that is the key to the new alliances that have been made in the Middle East. Very interesting alliances. Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia alliance, right? And then you'll have, Russia, Syria alliance. And then you'll have, Lebanon. There's these very interesting alliances, and at the end of the day, it's to instill this fear and to sell more weapons to that region, and that's exactly what's happening.
So to American healthcare workers, what do you say?
Well, to American healthcare workers, I would say the same thing that I would say to everyone, which is we need to, be more aware of what is happening with our tax money, so that in the same way as, physicians, nurses, therapists, we feel the effects of a limited, financial support for our medical institutions. We feel it. We feel how our patients don't have, they're not getting the care that they need sometimes because, they're uninsured or they're not able to qualify for insurance. We really need to concentrate on bringing that money instead of, billions of dollars being sent to military aid. We can invest this money in our own healthcare system, in our education system, and also make a stand, as for certain organizations to feel comfortable to make a stand that, this is not something that we support.